Good afternoon. I'm Michael Sanders, and this broadcast is coming to you from Canterbury Woods in Pacific Grove. Today, I'd like to feature the music of Ella Fitzgerald. She's been called by many people the first lady of song, and certainly for us Americans, it would be hard to think of anybody who has had as strong an impact on American popular music as she has. She started out with quite a hard life. Her mother was a single mother for most of her early childhood. And then she died. The mother died when Ella was still quite young, and her stepfather at that point was abusive. Ella ended up first in a penitentiary for young black girls, and then living with an aunt. Her first musical break was at a public audition at the Apollo Theater in Harlem. The story, part of that story is a well-known one. She was waiting in line to go on, and one of the acts that was ahead of her was a dance group, a dance partnership. And they were good enough that Ella, on the spur of the moment, scrapped her plan to dance as her audition and instead sang, and she won the audition. That's the well-known part of the story. The other part of the story is that because of the way she looked and the way that she carried herself, she never got the main part of the prize of winning the audition, which was a week of performances at the Apollo. She had better luck a little bit later when she auditioned for the drummer and band leader Cliff Webb, who had his own orchestra that broadcast nationally. Cliff Webb liked her, but he said this. He was reluctant to sign her because she was gawky and unkempt, a diamond in the rough. Well, he decided to give her a chance because he had an upcoming date playing a dance at the Yale University and had her come along and sing. And she was so successful with the audience and so much impressed the other members of the band that he did hire her. And they had several years of recording and performing sessions together. She made several solid hits, but the first really great hit was a song that she based on a nursery rhyme. She is credited as part composer of this piece. It became not only a huge radio hit, but also it was probably the best-selling song of that decade. Here's the song, A Tisket, a Tasket. Thank you. Now, Cliff Webb had been ill almost all his life. He had spinal pneumonia, and he died the year after this song was recorded in 1939. And at that point, an unusual thing happened. The band did not break up. Instead, it became Ella and Her Famous Orchestra. That was the title. And Ella was, in fact, a very successful band leader for another 6 years. If you ask Jack Stanley, he can tell you what a complicated job that is, to be a director of a popular band. She recorded more than 150 songs with the band over the course of her connection with that. All through her recording career, she did both jazz music and then popular hits. But I'm going to separate them, though they weren't really separated as clearly chronologically. And I'm going to do works from a jazz background first. So I'd like now to do one of the great hits by Erroll Garner, Misty. We know it mostly as a song, I think, but it was written as an instrumental piece, and words were just added by Johnny Burke a little bit later. We know it particularly in the performance by Johnny Mathis. But Johnny Mathis was not the only one to sing this song. Frank Sinatra was, and certainly so was Ella Fitzgerald. So here's the song, Misty, written by Erroll Garner. Thank you. Now, I'd like to intersperse among these songs that Ella Fitzgerald sang some arabesques. That's a term that was especially popular in the 19th century. Many of the great composers wrote arabesques. The term itself comes from the French language. Arabesque means Arabian or Arabic. And it was first applied in architectural criticism to describe the wall coverings that Muslim religious buildings had. The religion of Islam takes very seriously the injunction not to have any graven images, and so there are no portraits of saints or such in mosques. Instead, the designs are based either on plant forms, leaves and stems and flowers, or on the beautiful calligraphy of the Arabic language. In any case, in the 19th century, that term became popular. It was adopted, for example, by the Art Nouveau movement. And the Art Nouveau movement had a strong impact on early Debussy. Debussy himself talked about the arabesque, this curving line shaped by the forces of nature. In what he wrote about Baroque music could be applied to Debussy himself. So he wrote this. Of the Baroque era, he said, "That was the age of the, quote, wonderful arabesque," close quote, when music was subject to the laws of beauty inscribed in the movements of nature herself. Early in his career, he wrote a set of 2 arabesques. They're sometimes considered his first impressionistic pieces. And I'd like to play for you now the first of them, the one in E major, Arabesque in E major by Debussy. Thank you. Now, I'd like to return to Ella Fitzgerald and to two of the songs that she sang with great success that were written by Duke Ellington. The first of them is Satin Doll. He composed that, and it eventually became the traditional ending for a Duke Ellington concert, Satin Doll, as an instrumental. He wrote it with Billy Strayhorn, and the lyrics were by Johnny Mercer. The lyrics were composed after it had already become a success as an instrumental piece. In any case, here is Satin Doll by Duke Ellington. Thank you. And the other Duke Ellington song is It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing. Ellington composed this in Chicago, of all places. He was playing concerts at the Lincoln Tavern in Chicago, and he wrote it during intermissions between performances there. The song was called by Gunther Schuller, the jazz critic. He said it's now legendary and a prophetic piece and a prophetic title. Ellington said that it became famous because it was an expression of a sentiment which prevailed among jazz musicians at the time. Not to be esoteric, not to be cerebral, but to have swing. Ellington credited it to a trumpeter, probably pretty much forgotten now, named Bubber Miley, whose creed it was that it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Miley died in the year that this piece was finally recorded, And so, in a way, this is a memorial to him. Anyway, here is It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing by Duke Ellington. Thank you. Now I'd like to return to the 19th century to play the music of a Polish-born composer, most successful in Germany, Moritz Moszkowski. I'd better spell that to you for you. Moszkowski, Moszkowski. Now, the much more famous to us now, Polish pianist, Paderewski, had this to say about Moszkowski. He said, after Chopin, Moszkowski best understands how to write for the piano, and his writing embraces the whole gamut of piano technique. Quite successful. His music was very popular. He was popular both as a performer and as a composer. But by his middle 50s, Moszkowski's health had begun to fail, and his music had faded in popularity. He was essentially out of touch with the music of his time. He said in about 1905 that he had refused to take composition students because he said they all wanted to write like artistic madmen such as Scriabin, Schoenberg, Debussy, and Satie. He spent his last years in poverty. He had done what seemed like a prudent thing to do, which was to sell all his copyrights and invest the money in German and Polish and Russian bonds. And then along came the First World War, and those bonds were worthless. Well, he was, as I say, in poverty when his student, Joseph Hoffmann, learned of his straits, and Hoffmann got together some of his musical friends and put on a huge benefit concert in Carnegie Hall with 15 pianos on the stage. They raised quite a lot of money for Moszkowski. and arranged to have that money sent to him. Unfortunately, he died before he was able to access it. Well, that's a fairly melancholy story, but the music that Moszkowski wrote is generally quite cheerful, and so is this one. This is an arabesque in G major. It is Opus 61, number 3 by Moszkowski. Now, Ella Fitzgerald continued singing, especially among her most favorite concerts were Jazz at the Philharmonic concerts that were arranged by Norman Granz. She was still doing that in 1955, doing the jazz music that she loved, the scat singing, the working with wonderful instrumental soloists. But she noticed something that, as she says it, I had gotten to the point where I was only singing bebop. I thought bebop was it, and that all I had to do was go someplace and sing bop. But I finally got to the point where I had no place to sing. I realized then that there was more to music than Bach. Norman, that's Norman Granz, felt that I should do other things. So he produced Ella Fitzgerald Sings the Cole Porter Songbook with me. It was a turning point in my life. Grant's put together an entire record company around Ella Fitzgerald called Verve Music. And eventually, he had Ella Fitzgerald record 8 albums of songs written by the great composers in the American musical theater tradition. They're probably as precious a treasury as we have, and they almost define what we mean when we say the Great American Songbook. I'd like to play now 2 of the songs that Ella Fitzgerald sang that were written by Rodgers and Hart. Earlier this week we had Jack Stanley playing music all by Richard Rodgers, and I will duplicate some of the selections that he played so beautifully. I'll begin with The Lady is a Tramp. It comes from a musical, not much as a musical, but a treasury of fabulous songs. Let me just read you some of the songs that come from that 1937 musical. Where or When, My Funny Valentine, Johnny One Note, and I Wish I Were in Love Again. And the song that I'll play, which is a spoof of New York high society and its strict etiquette and phony pretensions, begins with the famous words, I get too hungry for dinner at 8. I like the theater, but never come late. I never bother with people I hate. That's why the lady is a tramp. Thank you. And another Rodgers and Hart song, from Pal Joey. Pal Joey was a rather unpleasant musical, also with great songs. It was written based on short stories of John O'Hara. Joey, Pal Joey, is a kind of anti-hero who's having an affair with a married woman. And this is the song that the married woman sings, her love and infatuation for him. It comes back at the end of the musical. She has seen through Joey and has managed to get her life back together. But there's no hope for Joey. He's going to be messed up and miserable all his life. Anyway, here is the song Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered. Now I'd like to play another arabesque. This is in A minor, and it's by a Hungarian composer, Stephen Heller. Unlike most, I suppose, composers of the 19th century, he was relatively long-lived, 75 or 76. He managed to outlive his popularity, but his music now is still sometimes studied by piano students. Anyway, here is the arabesque in A minor of Stephen Heller. Now here's a song by Irving Berlin that might have belonged in my last program, which was songs about dances. It's called Cheek to Cheek. It comes from a movie, Top Hat, and it's sung by Fred Astaire to Ginger Rogers. Cheek to Cheek. Now finally, two Gershwin songs written by the Gershwin brothers, Ira for the words and George for the music. This appeared in the musical Girl Crazy, sung by Ginger Rogers, the same person, of course, that that Fred Astaire was singing to in the previous song. This recording by Ella Fitzgerald won the 1960 Grammy Award for the Best Female Vocal Performance. And the song is But Not For Me. Now I'd like to play one final arabesque, probably the best known of all the arabesques from the 19th century. This is Robert Schumann's. In it we have hints of the three personalities that Schumann took quite seriously as parts of himself. Eusebius, the dreamer, and that's the principal theme that we hear a total of 3 times. And then Florestan, the passionate man of action, that appears in the 2 interludes, episodes in minor that occur. And then Raro, the philosopher and reconciler of differences, who appears for a moment at the very end in the touching and beautiful coda. So here is the arabesque in C major, opus 18 of Schumann. Well, I want to thank you, and I want to thank Keith Chase for all the time he spends preparing for these concerts and then recording them. He and I have both been suffering in a swelteringly hot auditorium. I appreciate his putting up with that. I thank Blanca Diaz for her help in making these concerts available to you on YouTube and on the community television. But one last song, another song of George Gershwin. I think in the performance by Ella Fitzgerald, it captures what people, so many different musical walks of life admired about her. Opera singers loved her singing. Jazz instrumentalists loved her singing. Popular singers admired and loved her singing. She had qualities that very few people have even one of, and she had all of them. She had perfect rhythm. She had perfect intonation, perfect vocal production and breath control. Those were the sorts of things that opera singers noticed. She had musical taste and imagination, incredible vocal flexibility. Those were the things that jazz musicians admired. And she had an instant and immediate connection with audiences, a heart-to-heart connection. And that's what I suppose all musicians admired about her. So here's one final song, George Gershwin's song, Someone to Watch Over Me.